Hello, friends. I am your host, Matt Gore, and welcome back to the History Revolution podcast. The purpose of the History Revolution is to help homeschool parents teach their children American history. Today, we're talking about a man whose voice, or rather, the technology he gave us to share our voices, changed everything. His name, Alexander Graham Bell. Inventor of the telephone? Sure. But there's so much more to this guy than a single eureka moment. I want to remind you that our new course, The Carolina Colony Before the Founding, is now available. I also want to remind you to join our newsletter to stay up to date with all of our latest episodes, blogs, and specials. The link for our course and the newsletter are in the description. Now, let's explore Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell was born on March 3rd, 1847 in Edinburgh, Scotland. Picture this: cobblestone streets, foggy mornings, and a family obsessed with sound. His dad, Alexander Melville Bell, was a professor who studied speech and developed something called visible speech, which was a system to help deaf people learn to speak by showing them how sounds are made. His mom, Eliza, was a musician who started losing her hearing when Alec, that's what they called him, was a young boy. Sound, speech, and communication weren't just dinner table talk in the Bell household. They were the family business. Alec was a curious kid. He was homeschooled for a while, and by age 11, he'd already invented a gadget to help a friend's family husk wheat. Not bad for an 11-year-old, right? But his real passion was sound. He'd mess around with tuning forks, study how vibrations worked, and even taught his dog to growl on command while he manipulated its vocal cords. Yeah, a little weird, but it showed how early he was hooked on the science of speech. By the time he was a teenager, tragedy struck. Both of his brothers died of tuberculosis, and the family decided to start fresh in Canada in 1870. They landed in Brantford, Ontario, hoping the cleaner air would protect Alec, who was also showing signs of the illness. Spoiler, he survived, and Canada became the launch pad for his biggest breakthroughs. So let's fast forward to Boston, 1871. Alec is now 24, teaching at a school for the deaf, and totally immersed in the world of communication. He has his dad's visible speech system in his toolkit, and he's working with deaf students, including a young woman named Maybelle Gardner Hubbard, who had lost her hearing to scarlet fever as a kid. Mabel's dad, Gardner Hubbard, was a wealthy lawyer and businessman, and he'd later become one of Alec's biggest backers. Oh, and Mabel? She eventually became Mrs. Bell. Alec was obsessed with this idea. Could sound be turned into something you could send over a wire? The telegraph was already a thing, dots and dashes zipping across continents, but Alec wanted to transmit the human voice. He wasn't alone in this dream. A guy named Elisha Gray was tinkering with similar ideas, and the race was on. Alec teamed up with Thomas Watson, a skilled electrician, and they started experimenting in a messy little workshop. Now here's where it gets cinematic. On March 10, 1876, Alec is fiddling with his latest contraption, a liquid transmitter with a needle that vibrated in water to carry sound waves. He spills some acid, yells, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." And Watson, in the next room, hears it through the device. Crystal clear. The telephone is born. Well, kind of. That's the Hollywood version. In reality, it was more of a, I think we're on to something moment than a polished invention ready for the masses. But still, this development was huge. That first call wasn't just a fluke. Bell patented the telephone in 1876, beating Elisha Gray to the patent office by a matter of hours. There's some debate about who really invented it first. Gray had a similar design, but history gave Bell the win. And let's be real, the name Bell just sounds better on a phone than Gray. The telephone debuted at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition in 1876, and it blew people's minds. Emperor Dom Pedro II of Brazil supposedly shouted, "My God, it talks!" Investors came running, and Bell Telephone Company was founded in 1877. By the 1880s, telephone lines were spiderwebbing across cities, and people were figuring out how to say hello instead of ahoy when they picked up. Fun fact, Bell actually preferred ahoy as a greeting, but Thomas Edison pushed for hello, and that stuck. But here's the thing, Bell didn't stop at the telephone. This guy was a restless inventor. He worked on everything from early hearing aids to hydrofoils, those boats that skim across the water. He even dabbled in aeronautics, helping design a kite-like airplane called the Silver Dart that flew in Canada in 1909. And get this, he co-founded the National Geographic Society in 1888 because he was fascinated by exploration and science. The dude was everywhere. Now let's talk about the personal side of Alexander Graham Bell. Because he wasn't just a lab rat. He married Mabel in 1877 and they had 4 kids, 2 daughters who survived and 2 sons who didn't. Mabel was his rock. She was smart, opinionated, and managed their finances while Alec chased his wild ideas. They settled in Washington, D.C., and later bought a sprawling estate in Nova Scotia. It was his happy place. Think rugged cliffs, open water, and a lab where he could tinker to his heart's content. Bell's work with the deaf community stayed close to his heart. He taught and advocated and poured money into schools and research. But here's a twist. He also supported some controversial ideas. He was into eugenics, the selective breeding of humans to improve the population, and thought deaf people shouldn't marry each other to prevent deafness from spreading. By the early 20th century, Bell was a celebrity. The telephone had transformed society. Businesses boomed. Families connected across miles, and the world shrank. He kept inventing, but he also slowed down a bit, enjoying his family and his Nova Scotia retreat. On August 2nd, 1922, at the age of 75, he passed away from complications of diabetes. Legend has it that when he died, every telephone in North America went silent for a minute in his honor. Whether that's true or just a good story, it's a fitting tribute. So what is Bell's legacy? The telephone, obviously. It's the great-granddaddy of the smartphone you're probably listening to this on. But beyond that, he was a guy who never stopped asking, what if? He bridged science and human connection. And even when his ideas didn't pan out, he kept pushing. He wasn't perfect, but he was relentless. Now let's wrap this up with a little what if of our own. Imagine you're in 1876. And Alexander Graham Bell hands you the first clunky telephone. You press it to your ear, hear a crackly voice on the other end, and realize the world just got a lot smaller. That's the magic he unleashed, a spark of curiosity that's still ringing today. Thank you, friends, for joining me on this journey through the life of a man who changed the world as we know it, Alexander Graham Bell. Don't forget the links in the description to join our newsletter and to learn more about our new course, The Carolina Colony Before the Founding. If you're watching on YouTube and you like this podcast, give us a thumbs up and subscribe. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, leave us a 5-star review. God bless you, and see you again next week.